In 1979, Soviet pilots called their Mi-24s Satan's Chariot, armored machines tearing across Afghan skies, so invincible that entire valleys emptied at the sound of their rotors. But in 1986, everything changed. A new threat appeared in the Afghan mountains that shattered the illusion of Soviet air dominance overnight. Suddenly, the flying tank became a death trap, and elite crews began carrying pistols, not for the enemy, but for themselves. What happened in those mountains broke Moscow's war machine. The hunters had become the hunted. How did total dominance turn to disaster? The answer exposes a tactical paradox that changed the course of a superpower. When the Mi-24 Hind thundered into Afghanistan in 1979, it was more than just another helicopter. Soviet engineers had built it to be both a gunship and a troop carrier, a flying tank that could land a squad of infantry, then unleash a storm of firepower. The cockpit was wrapped in titanium armor, thick enough to shrug off direct hits from 23mm anti-aircraft guns. Pilots sat behind bulletproof glass, surrounded by panels designed to protect against the kind of ground fire that had chewed up helicopters in Vietnam. Armed with a 4-barrel 12.7mm Yak-B machine gun in its chin turret, the Hind could rip through mud brick compounds and machine gun nests. Under its stubby wings, it carried racks of 57mm rockets and 86 spiral anti-tank missiles, enough ordnance to flatten a hillside or stop an armored convoy in its tracks. The Mi-24's twin engines pushed it to speeds of over 335 kilometers per hour, making it one of the fastest helicopters of its time. Its service ceiling reached nearly 4,500 meters, high enough to clear most Afghan mountain passes. Soviet doctrine called for precision strikes from above 3,000 meters, well out of reach of the Mujahideen's DSHK heavy machine guns and ZPU-1 anti-aircraft cannons. From that altitude, the Hind could rain down rockets or swoop in to drop troops behind enemy lines. Afghan fighters learned to recognize the sound of its rotors, a low thunder that echoed across valleys and sent entire villages scrambling for cover. The nickname spread quickly: Satan's Chariot. To the Soviets, the Mi-24 was a symbol of technological superiority. To the Mujahideen, it was terror made real. By 1981, nearly 300 helicopters, including over 200 Hinds, patrolled the skies. Within 2 years, the number swelled to more than 500 Soviet helicopters in theater. Losses were rare. Early in the war, the Hind's armor and altitude kept it nearly untouchable. Soviet pilots, especially those in elite regiments, flew with the confidence of men who believed their machines were invincible. They called themselves the Grey Wolves and signed up for missions with aggressive call signs, certain that their flying tanks could take whatever the mountains threw at them. Convoys moved under the Hind's shadow. Artillery barrages were coordinated with rocket runs. The Mi-24's presence alone often cleared resistance before ground troops arrived. For 7 years, the Soviets controlled the air, and the Hind was the sharp end of that dominance, a machine built for total war, flying above a country that seemed powerless to stop it. On September 25, 1986, in the dust-choked valleys near Jalalabad, the rules of the Afghan war changed in a single flash. A group of Mujahideen fighters, trained just days earlier in Pakistan, shouldered a weapon no Soviet pilot had ever faced in battle, a United States-made Stinger missile. The target was a Mi-24 Hind, armored and confident, flying a routine patrol above the tree line. Seconds after launch, the missile locked onto the Hind's blazing exhaust. In less than 5 seconds, a machine built to survive cannon fire and rockets was torn apart by a weapon that cost less than a Soviet officer's car. The Hind, worth up to $15 million, dropped in flames to the rocky ground. The route that brought the Stinger to Jalalabad ran through layers of secrecy. The CIA shipped the first batches to Pakistan's ISI, who then smuggled them over the border hidden in convoys of food and ammunition. Training was basic, 2 hours with an American instructor, then straight to the front lines. The men who fired that first missile were engineers and farmers, not soldiers, but on that day they became the first to prove that Soviet air power could be brought down by a weapon fired from a hillside. Soviet pilots had no warning. For 7 years their doctrine had called for high-altitude strikes, safe above the reach of ground fire. The Hind's titanium armor and speed had made it nearly untouchable. Now, in a single engagement, that confidence evaporated. The Stinger did not care about armor. It hunted heat, and the Hind's twin engines burned like beacons. There was no time to react. No evasive maneuver could outrun a missile traveling at Mach 2.2. The cockpit, once a fortress, became a trap. The shock in Moscow was immediate. Reports filtered in from the field, first as rumors, then as confirmed losses. Commanders demanded explanations, engineers scrambled for countermeasures, but nothing in the Soviet arsenal could match the precision or portability of the Stinger. The cost equation was brutal. Every Mi-24 lost was a multi-million-dollar blow. Every Stinger fired was only a fraction of that price, supplied in bulk by an enemy who never set foot on Afghan soil. In the months that followed, Soviet pilots faced a choice: fly low and risk ambush by machine guns and rocket-propelled grenade ambushes, or climb high and risk instant death from an unseen missile. The Mi-24 was supposed to be invulnerable. In Jalalabad it became clear that the battlefield had changed. The age of air dominance was over, and a new kind of war had begun. The FM-92 Stinger missile arrived in Afghanistan as a weapon defined by science, not superstition. Its guidance system combined 2 sensors, infrared and ultraviolet, working together to track heat and light in a way that made deception nearly impossible. Soviet engineers had relied on flares to confuse heat-seeking missiles, but the Stinger's ultraviolet channel ignored those decoys and locked instead onto the distinctive signature of a helicopter's exhaust and rotor wash. The Stinger's seeker head needed only a fraction of a second to identify and track a target. Once fired, the missile required no further guidance. Its fire-and-forget technology meant the operator could take cover immediately, while the missile closed the distance at over Mach 2.2, nearly 2,700 kilometers per hour. From the ground, a Hind at 4,000 meters altitude had seemed untouchable. The Stinger's effective range of 4,800 meters shattered that illusion. Engagement envelopes overlapped perfectly with the Mi-24's operating altitudes. The missile's proximity fuse detonated even if it missed by less than a meter, sending shrapnel into a Hind's engines or tail boom. The result was catastrophic loss of control, fire, and almost certain destruction. Statistics from the field told the rest of the story. In 340 documented Stinger engagements, 269 Soviet aircraft were destroyed, resulting in a 79% kill rate. Of those, 27 Mi-24 Hinds were confirmed lost to Stingers, each one erasing years of design and millions of dollars in seconds. The numbers stripped away any hope of a technical fix. No amount of armor or countermeasures could overcome a missile that saw through every trick, struck from beyond visual range, and killed with near mathematical certainty. Altitude became a matter of survival, not strategy. Soviet Mi-24 pilots were trapped in a shrinking envelope between 2 types of death. Above 2,000 meters, every second in the air meant risking a Stinger lock. The missile's seeker did not care about flares or evasive turns. Once it caught the heat signature from the Hind's twin engines, it followed relentlessly. Climbing higher offered no safety. The Stinger's range stretched to nearly 5,000 meters, overlapping the very altitudes Soviet doctrine once called safe. Dropping lower brought its own set of dangers. At treetop height, the Hind's massive frame and sluggish handling made it an easy target for heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. Afghan fighters learned to set up ambushes along likely flight paths, using the valleys to funnel helicopters into kill zones. The Hind's armor, designed for frontal protection, left its underside and rear exposed. A single burst from a DSHK could punch through the ventral plating, ignite fuel, or sever control lines. Every modification to improve survivability came with a price. Exhaust suppressors were bolted on to mask the engine heat, but the added weight made the helicopter even less responsive. Armored belly plates meant to shield against ground fire further slowed climb rates and limited maneuverability in the thin mountain air. The Mi-24's design, part gunship, part transport, meant it was never truly agile. With a full load, it weighed over 8 tons. No amount of skill could make it outclimb a missile or outturn a machine gun burst at low altitude. Pilots faced a brutal decision tree: fly high and hope the Stinger teams missed, or hug the ground and gamble with ambushes. There was no safe altitude. Each mission became a calculation of risk, with the odds growing worse every month. The cockpit, once a place of pride, now felt like a sealed compartment on a doomed vessel. The old swagger faded from the Hind crews as the war ground on. In the ready rooms, pilots who once called themselves Grey Wolves began using a different name: mandatory Matrosovs. The reference was dark. Alexander Matrosov, the Red Army soldier who threw himself onto a German machine gun nest in 1943, sacrificing his life so others could advance. For the men flying into Afghan valleys after 1986, the comparison felt less like myth and more like a daily reality. The joke, if it was a joke, was that every mission was now an act of self-sacrifice. Letters and taped conversations from that period reveal a shift in what mattered to the crews. Before, it was about mission success and pride in the machine. After the arrival of the Stinger, survival became the only score that counted. Pilots began to carry their Makarov pistols with a new sense of purpose. The unspoken rule was simple: save the last bullet for yourself if you went down in hostile territory. Officially, the pistol was for defense. Unofficially, it was insurance against capture. Rumors spread about cyanide capsules, though no formal orders ever surfaced. The fear was real enough. Human rights reports from 1987 and 1988 documented what happened to crews who fell into Mujahideen hands. Torture, sometimes skinning alive. Soviet command never acknowledged these fates. Families received word that their sons were missing or killed in action, never the details. The rituals of pre-flight changed too. Some pilots stuffed family photos or religious icons into their flight suits. Others wrote short notes and left them behind in lockers. The banter of the early years was replaced by a brittle humor, a way to mask the dread that came with every takeoff. As one pilot wrote in his diary, "We are not heroes. We are men sent to die in machines that cannot save us." By the end of 1988, the Soviet helicopter war in Afghanistan had become a grim arithmetic. The Ministry of Defense's own records counted 333 helicopters lost in 10 years, more than twice the number of tanks destroyed. Nearly 2/3 of those losses came after September 1986, when the Stinger missile turned the sky into a no-man's land. In the valleys north of Kandahar, Colonel Alexander Rutskoy watched 3 Mi-24s go down in a single afternoon. His after-action reports read like a ledger of defeat: engines torn open, crews lost, recovery impossible. Rutskoy's own words, sent up the chain, carried the weight of a commander who knew air power was slipping away. "We couldn't protect our own helicopters. How could we protect ground forces?" During the peak months, Soviet aviation losses reached levels not seen since the Korean War. Field diaries and ministry data show that in the 30 months after the Stinger's arrival, helicopter losses outpaced every other category of Soviet armored vehicles. Each downed Hind meant not just a lost machine, but a crew erased, a mission aborted, and another blow to a doctrine that had once promised air supremacy. The ledger kept growing, each entry a step closer to withdrawal. The Pentagon gave it a name in 1987. The Stinger effect. A single shoulder-fired missile, costing $35,000, had forced a superpower to rewrite its doctrine. In Afghanistan, the Mi-24's defeat was not just a local disaster. It became a warning broadcast across the world. NATO planners pored over after-action reports, searching for ways to protect their own helicopters from the same fate. The United States began redesigning the Apache, lowering its heat signature and improving agility, while European armies rushed to develop new tactics for flying in man-pads-infested battlefields. But the Stinger legacy did not stop at doctrine. The CIA had shipped more than 2,000 missiles into Afghanistan. After the Soviet withdrawal, only about 1,400 were recovered. That left 600 Stingers unaccounted for, missiles that would surface in Chechnya, in Sri Lanka, and in the hands of groups far beyond the original war. Buyback programs failed when Mujahideen commanders refused to give up what they saw as their ultimate bargaining chip. The world's most advanced anti-aircraft weapon had become a loose thread in the fabric of global security. The cost equation was as stark as the battlefield results. The Soviet Union spent an estimated $240 billion on the Afghan war. The entire Stinger program, including training and logistics, cost the United States just $3 billion. For every Mi-24 lost, millions vanished in smoke and fire. For every Stinger fired, the calculus of modern warfare changed. In Ukraine, decades later, Russian helicopters fell to new generations of Western missiles. It is proof that the Stinger effect still echoes, long after the last Hind crashed in the Panjshir Valley. Today, $35,000 missiles still bring down multi-million-dollar gunships, just as they did in Afghanistan nearly 4 decades ago. Modern wars from Ukraine to Syria repeat the same tactical error, overestimating armor and underestimating adaptation. The lesson endures in every smoking wreck. Technology alone never guarantees victory. In the end, it is the survivors who rewrite the rules. Share your thoughts on how this legacy shapes today's conflicts.